Welcome to this webinar of the Center for Security Policy, marking the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine, launched there by Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, on the 24th of February. It happens that it's approximately the anniversary of the start of this war several years previously, in 2014, also at the hands of Vladimir Putin, with the invasion of the Ukrainian area known as Crimea. We're going to talk in the course of today's program with three extraordinary individuals, all of whom have had experience with Ukraine, with to varying degrees the wider area, and the players in this conflict in ways that I think will impart some very important insights into the nature of this conflict, how it has come to this point, where it is likely to go, and I hope shed some light on what American policy should be with respect to the conflict that is the worst war on the European continent since the end of the Second World War. We're going to begin the program with Andrei Illarionov. He has a unique background, I think it's fair to say. He served as a senior economist in successive Russian governments, beginning with the acting prime minister, Yegor Gaidar, who served for a time shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, then as a chief economic advisor to then Prime Minister Chernomyrdin, and subsequently for a man who has served both as President and Prime Minister of Russia, Vladimir Putin. He is one of the few who departed Vladimir Putin's company without suffering horrific personal ill effects. And he, I think, brings, therefore, to this topic a perspective about the man who has precipitated this conflict, why he has done so, and whether he will, in fact, be dissuaded from pursuing it unless and until he has stopped, and perhaps beyond the immediate conflict, much worse. Andrei is going to open our program with his insights, and we will then introduce in turn our two other panelists. I'm very pleased to have a man I've come to admire greatly and value tremendously his insights and his articulate depiction of them. Andrei Illarionov, welcome to this program. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Frank, for your very generous introduction. I'm trying to mention several points, maybe about 7 points, thesis that we can discuss later. The first one, this is the worst war in the European continent since the Second World War. According to the latest estimates from the Western intelligence, Russian military losses in the war, both killed, wounded, probably close or higher than 200,000. Ukrainian losses, at least 100,000 concerning military. As for civilian losses, United Nations claim that it's more than 30,000, and we don't know what has happened in Mariupol. According to the local authorities, the number of people who perished during the siege of the Mariupol is probably 80,000 or maybe even more. So we don't have exact numbers, but right now we are talking probably about the cumulative losses, about 400,000 people, and maybe more. Second, the name of the war. The very popular name of this war, like war in Ukraine or Ukrainian war or Ukraine war, is not correct, is not accurate, not only because the theater of military actions goes not only within Ukraine, but beyond Ukraine on the territory of Russia as well. But it is a very favorable title for Kremlin and for Kremlin's propaganda. That is why Kremlin very much likes to call this war war in Ukraine or Ukraine war, because it deflects attention of public attention from the main chief culprit of this war, from Kremlin, from Russia, from Putin's regime. So the correct title of this war is Russian-Ukrainian war or Russo-Ukrainian war. But this war is only part of the bigger war that Mr. Putin launched. This is also an element of much larger conflict that he envisaged and he is waging right now. That is a war against the West. And his rhetoric and his actions goes not only against Ukraine, but against much larger community of nations, against the basic pillars of the Western civilization. My third point about the length of this war. This is a very long war already, and it will be very long war, even looking from today. The latest stage of this war has been studied on February 24th last year, and that is why we're mentioning this anniversary. But the conventional war against Ukraine has been launched on February 20th, 2014, 9 years ago. And the war itself was in preparation by Putin since September year 2003. Before year 2014, this war was mostly in a way that we can call hybrid war, without use of conventional forces. Since 2014, it is a conventional war. And over the last year, it is war of relatively high intensity. And now it's getting to a new stage, which we can discuss on this 4-point. What is going on in the theater right now? This war is experiencing a new stage, that we can call that is associated with a new offensive from Russian forces. There are several opinions when this stage has been launched, based on military statistics of losses on the Russian side. It probably started around mid of January, with daily losses on the Russian side, 800 people. Several military experts pointing to the fact that it was not yet the next offensive of Russian forces that are expected within days or weeks in the spring. And that is exactly what we, or at least most of experts and observers, are expecting within coming weeks. A new offensive with much higher intensity of military action. Another very important point is who can win this war. Certainly, nobody can predict the result and outcome of the war, but one of the most important underlying condition for potential victory in the war is existence of, or non-existence of, military financial parity between sides. Right now, we have very strong disparity in terms not only of military forces, but underlying reason, military financial resources that can be used for this war. We know that, we don't know the precise number, but based on indirect calculations, the Russian side has spent last year, in year 2022, between 150 to 180 billion US dollars to finance these military operations. On the Ukrainian side, we know that their military spending was not more than 40 billion US dollars, and total military support from United States and other partners is 50 billion US dollars as committed security aid. Committed but not delivered. In terms of delivered aid, it's approximately 30 billion US dollars. So that is why the Ukraine and partners of Ukraine spends approximately 1/3 of resources that Russia is spending on this war. With such military financial disparity for Ukraine, it would be next to impossible not only to achieve a victory in this war, but also effectively defend itself, and certainly would be next to impossible to de-occupy occupied territories, to liberate those territories. As for military aid from the United States over this year committed military assistance to Ukraine at level 30 billion US dollars. You might have heard that the 4 packages that the US Congress voted for as assistance to Ukraine is close to 110 billion US dollars. But first of all, some part of this assistance goes not to Ukraine and even to the issues not related to military actions like food support in some other countries or even for vaccination in some other countries. But the military part of this package is, as of 2 days ago, is 50 billion US dollars, out of which approximately 19 billion US dollars military system has been delivered to the territory of Ukraine. You can compare these 19 billion US dollars with military expenditure that United States or other countries spend on similar conflicts or other military conflicts, and you will see a very clear disparity in those numbers. My last point will be about potential ceasefire that might be concluded at this point or in any close point without substantial changes in the front line. If such ceasefire will be achieved, it will give Putin an opportunity and chance to accumulate more military forces, more ammunition, armament, and so on. And after some pause, we don't know how long, it would give him another chance to attack Ukraine, to finish his main goal that he never hid it, and he once again repeated this goal in his yesterday State of Russia address, acquiring control over all Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrei. I appreciate the insights, and there's an awful lot of questions that will flow, I know, from them. Particularly your perspective on just the numbers that are endlessly bandied about and the reality of what they translate into actual military assistance on the ground in the moment in Ukraine. We will talk more about that momentarily. Next, though, you're going to speak to a woman who has been working tirelessly to help the people of Ukraine contend with one of the most difficult and deadly of the armaments that have been brought to bear in the course of this conflict, most especially by the Russians, namely landmines. Her name is Mitzi Perdue. She is a remarkable individual, very successful businesswoman, an award-winning author, and the past president of American Agri-Women, a group dedicated to assisting in one of our most important sectors of our economy, namely our agricultural sector, especially in light of this crisis and what it has done to world food supplies. The importance of that sector has arguably never been more important. We may hear a little bit about that from her in the course of questions, if not her remarks. Mitzi has been working in and has visited on a number of occasions Ukraine. She has recently published 18 stories on the humanitarian crisis that she has witnessed there. And she has begun a crowdsourced funding, I should say, effort to support mine clearing operations in Ukraine. Mitzi, it is wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for your efforts and for sharing your insights arising from them with us now.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, which of course I loved. So that you don't have to stare at me the whole time, I brought some slides. And can we have the first slide? Okay, what I'm going to share with you today in my 8 minutes is, and I'm going to set my timer. I got to see a different side of the war, of Russia's war on Ukraine. I was invited by the Kyiv region police, and Kyiv region is really quite large. There are 64,000 members of the police there. I was invited to come and look at the war from the point of view of the police. And you may not know this, but it's part of the Russian playbook that whenever they invade a country, one of the first things they do is they bomb the police stations, they cut communications, they target not only police, but their families. And if we can have the first slide, I'll show you one of the things that I saw myself. This is me at the Belarus border. There is a police station that was bombed, and you're looking at the extent of the bombing that they do. They also, another tactic is that they destroy all the police cars. And the point of this is it's a psychological operation. It's catastrophic if you live in a country to have it invaded, but you can multiply the harm and the PTSD that you will experience if you don't have police there to serve and protect. So it is, if we can have the next slide. What we're looking at now, and don't bother to read it, I'll just tell you that these are 8 invasions that the Russians have practiced or have done since their war in Ukraine. Between 1992 and 2023, there have only been 5 years that Russia hasn't been actively invading someplace. And during those missing 5 years, they were super active, but not to the level of a war in Africa. So we're dealing with a very bellicose country. And if we can have the next slide, I'm going to show you what you're looking at now is the beginning of what I'll be sharing with you about landmines. I don't know if you can see the landmine, but if you can, we need press click so that an animation will show up. Yes, do you see the landmine there? And then press again, and I'll show it even more clearly. This is what one of the landmines looks like. I mean, they have very many forms of them. Here's another mine. You can go to the next one. What you're looking at right now, it doesn't look like a mine, but it actually is, because please click again, and you will see inside those apparent cell phones there's plastic explosives, and they're attached to a light sensor so that when somebody, particularly a student, they love to put these in high schools, particularly a student, thinks they're turning on the cell phone. No, they are activating the plastic, because among the things that the Russians do to demoralize the population is just constant fear. You don't know, you're a kid, you've just returned home from, I don't know, your town has been liberated, and you come home and you rush up to where the toys are in your room, and the Russians have booby trapped your teddy bears or your dolls. I mean, the goal is just maximum terror and demoralization. And if we can go to the next slide. Yes. We seem to be missing one. All right, I'll tell you what we haven't shown. I have a video that shows one of the most evil things that I think exists on the planet practically. You've all seen images of the HIMARS rocket delivery system, and each one of them, I mean, eyeballing it looks as if each one of those HIMARS has maybe 50 rocket tubes. But the particular vehicle I want to describe, and I wish I could show you, but please bear with me and use your imagination. Each of those rocket tubes can hold separate landmines. So one tube might have as many as 75 landmines in it. And those rocket tubes can be, you're on a country road somewhere, somebody's told you that the most prime agricultural land is, maybe it's 3 miles away, maybe it's 10 miles away. You can aim the rockets towards prime agricultural land, and between the truck that you're on and the backup truck that will help you reload, you can deliver in one afternoon 7,500 landmines. And the effect of that is where you've just sprayed the countryside with landmines in prime agricultural territory, that the farmer simply can't find it, can't farm it. If there were one or two, possibly he could detect it. But what he's up against right now, possibly she is up against, is you're driving your tractor along and there may be 200 or 300 mines in your field. And it's almost the best cases it blows up your tractor. The worst cases it kills you. But in effect, you're probably not even going to try to farm it. And one of the aspects of landmines that's just particularly evil is, in all of history, we've used landmines since the American Civil War, but in all of history, there hasn't been the following conjunction of evil, which is it's on a larger scale than's ever been done before. The area of Ukraine right now that is contaminated with landmines on an industrial level is larger than the state of Florida. The Russians are mining the sea lanes, they're mining agricultural areas and urban areas. So there's never before on any kind of scale where all three sources of livelihood for a country has been mined like this. Just the level of attempt to terrorize a country into submission, it just hasn't been done before. But I'm somewhat optimistic. And I want to get to my reasons for being optimistic. And if we can press the clicker, what you're looking at right now it's a circle map showing the relative size of the major economies of the world. Look at the United States. It's 22.9 trillion, roughly $30 trillion. Click again, please. Russia is 1.6 trillion. And to give you a perspective on the size of Russia's economy, click again, please. And you're looking at South Korea, 1.8 trillion. I don't know what the outcome of the war is going to be, but for myself, I'd bet on an economy of 30 trillion versus one that's 1.6 trillion. And then if we can click again, I will show you. You see a tricycle that will not work very well. And now I want you, clicker, please, just click like a whole bunch of them in a row, ending with Venezuela. What you're looking at is the major backers of Russia. Every one of them has one or both of these problems. They're going bankrupt, or they have the government is categorized by huge demonstrations against it. The government isn't firm. So between an insecure government and going bankrupt, I'd sure prefer our allies to Russia's allies. And if we can have my next slide. All right, this is my final slide. And one click, please. Okay, that's me. And click again and the arrow will go away. But I'll tell you I'll share with you what you're looking at. In somewhere just right before Christmas, I was in Ukraine, and I happened to be in Kiev at a time where they were launching where the bad guys, where Russia was launching 45 missiles into Ukraine, and 30 of them were aimed exactly at Kyiv, where I was. What you're looking at is a bomb shelter. And I had what to me was one of the most moving events of my trip. It was a reason why I have so much faith in Ukraine. And it is, here we are in a bomb shelter. The teacher told me that she came to class with an armload of games for the children to play. She teaches math and physics, and you're looking at some of her class right here. She told the kids that, knowing that they don't know that they're going to come home to their home intact, or maybe somebody they love has been killed, because it's well known that these missiles are heading right towards Kyiv. And by the way, I've seen a cell phone, which you can look and see where the missiles came from and where they're heading. We know they're heading towards Kyiv, where these kids are. So here we are in a bomb shelter, and the teacher has offered games, and the children said, "We don't want your games. We're here to study math and physics. And if we can have one more click, we need to study, because our generation will be needed to rebuild our country." And when you have that kind of dedication and commitment, boy, that's where I'd put my money on Ukraine's prevailing. And one other quick slide, which I'm not going to dwell on, it is the last. I founded an organization. It's a crowdfunding organization called DonorC/Ukraine. And the purpose of it is, if we can raise $300,000, and we've already got 100,000 the first day, woohoo! If we can raise $300,000, we can pay the largest, oldest mine clearing organization. It's called the Halo Trust. If we can raise $300,000, it will put 18 mine clearing experts in the field for half a year. And the amount of good they can do in, children who won't have their feet blown off, or farmers who might be able to farm again, the amount of good it can do would be just extraordinary. And by the way, I have signed up to go to mine clearing school in Ukraine, first with the Halo Trust, and then I told some of my friends in the Kyiv police that I was going to be attending the Halo mine clearing school, and they said, "Oh, but we as police have mine clearing too. How would you like to attend our mine clearing school?" So with luck, in a few months, I'm going to go an awful lot more than I know right now about mine clearing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for yours, Mitzi, and bless you for this work, as well as sharing with us what's going on, and your own firsthand account of it is incredibly impressive. We're really appreciative. We're going to turn finally to a man who has known combat firsthand, served with great distinction in the United States Marine Corps as one of its very, very elite force reconnaissance Marines, serving in Afghanistan and I believe Iraq as well, certainly in Afghanistan. He has been acclaimed for that service. He suffered grievously for it in the form of PTSD and other wounds. His own personal experience and story is a remarkable one, and has led to the founding by him of a really vitally important organization, the Mighty Oaks Foundation. Another part of his story, following his time in uniform and following the founding of this organization that has helped countless other veterans of combat work through their personal challenges, many of them arising from their wound injuries, their war injuries, I should say. He went back to Afghanistan to try to rescue a man who had been his interpreter during his time there. And the story of Aziz and his family's extraction by our guest is the subject of a marvelous new book entitled Saving Aziz. And I strongly commend it to all of you. Our guest's name is Chad Robichaux. He has, in addition to all of that, devoted considerable time and effort and putting himself again in considerable harm's way to tend to and otherwise try to minister to those fighting the fight to protect Ukraine against the Russian invasion. And I certainly take Andrei's point about getting the terminology right. This is an invasion of a sovereign nation by Vladimir Putin's Russia. And I'm very pleased to have Chad with us to talk about more about what has been the toll taken by the invaders and what he is trying to do to help. Chad, welcome. It's a privilege to have you with us, sir. The floor is yours.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on, Frank. And it was great to hear from Andrei and Mitzi on their experiences there as well. As I was thinking about how to, pivoting off of, Andrei and Mitzi's, great points, I think it's important to understand the timing of all this for the people listening, because that could really get lost. The timing of this could really get lost. And not to take away from Ukraine, but it's important when you look at the timing of this to think about Afghanistan, the withdrawal from Afghanistan that was decided to be executed the second day of President Biden being in office. And when you do a decision like that to remove the U.S. military from the most strategic place in the globe, which would have been Bagram Air Force Base between Iraq, Iran, Russia, and China, not just the Afghan people who were left behind, the 40 million Afghan people who were left behind were watching, not just the American citizens were watching as our White House made this decision, but Vladimir Putin, Russia, and China are watching the United States military make one of the most strategic military errors in the history, I believe, in the history of our country. We lied to the American people. The White House lied to the American people. The mainstream media lied to the American people to say that we were in this endless war, this 20-year war we had to pull out. Meanwhile, we had 2,500 troops there participating in an international effort in Afghanistan to support and advise the Afghan National Army to keep the terrorism at bay in the mountains of Afghanistan. We have 2,500 troops all over the world. I can name 10 of them right now: Syria, Djibouti, Africa, all over the world. We still have consistent with American historical withdrawals, 80,000 troops in Japan since World War II, 40,000 troops in Germany since World War II, 35,000 troops in South Korea since the Korean War, protecting the 38th parallel. The United States military's presence in contingency hotspots around the world keep the world a safer place, and it prevents future wars by bringing stability to different areas of the world. And when the United States of America participates and has these contingencies, the rest of the world always seemingly follows, not by policy, but just by historically trusting the United States positioning around the world. And our ally nations always tend to follow along with us. So why Afghanistan is so important to understand what's going on in Ukraine is because, Vladimir Putin's watching the United States of America, supposedly the strongest nation in the world, led by our commander-in-chief, who's supposed to be, the leader of the free world, buckle and fall to the Taliban, a terrorist regime, to the influence of China and Iran and other countries that wanted to control Afghanistan. We completely crumbled under those pressures, even when we did the withdrawal, which I didn't agree with that withdrawal, but even when we did the withdrawal, gave away the strategic position to our enemies, did it without the consultation of the NATO forces and our ally partners around the world, without the consultation of our Afghan government that we put 20 years in place. Only with talking to the Taliban. We gave them a date, not terms. We didn't say we'll leave when we get Americans out. We'll leave when we get our allies out. We'll leave when we get our weapons out, our $85 billion weapons out. We said we could leave on this date. And when we asked for more time, the Taliban flexed against us, and we buckled, and we did not push back, and we withdrew. And honestly, it's a shame for me to say, but it's very important to say, we retreated. We evacuated our embassy because the Taliban wouldn't let us leave our embassy. We had to fly our embassy flag off the roof of a building, just like in Saigon in 1975. It was an embarrassment, and the rest of the world was watching, especially Vladimir Putin, especially China. And then we see after that happens, you got to think all this happened. All this happened in the first months of President Biden being in office. August was the withdrawal, only 8 months after him being in office, and then we see as this is happening, you see Putin start to flex, and in January he's moving troops to the Ukrainian border, and this is a perfect example of when the United States is strong, the world is a safer place. Period. People could call that, American exceptionalism or whatever my patriotic pride is, but it's just the truth. When America is strong, the world is a safer and more stable place. America is weak right now. It was weak on January of 2021, and we've seen the world fall apart. And Vladimir Putin was watching, and he moved troops to the Ukrainian border and flexed on that border by February, he had 100,000 troops on the border. And when he did that, President Biden's response was to remove all U.S. troops from Ukraine. He closed our embassy. He notified U.S. citizens that they need to leave by February 14th. When President Biden did that, the rest of the world, as is tradition and geomilitary positioning, the rest of the world, European countries followed and left Ukraine alone and gave Putin a green light to roll into Ukraine. And that's how this all began. So I think the timing of it's very important to look at what happened when President Biden took office, what happened in Afghanistan, who was watching, how all this played out, and how we as America is responsible for allowing this to happen, for emboldening our enemies to do something like this. And meanwhile, without getting off topic even further, China is eyeing, just like Putin is saying Ukraine's part of the Soviet Union, eyeing Ukraine. China is eyeing Taiwan and watching all this unfold. And Taiwan is right in the crosshairs of China for this exact same reasons, not only because they believe it's theirs, but because America, frankly, will probably not do anything about it and allow them to do that. And so as I'm seeing this unfold, my heart is always for people. I traditionally try not to care about the politics. A lot of people would say Zelensky's corrupt, and why are you there helping in Ukraine? Because Zelensky's corrupt. And the truth is, I don't care if Zelensky's corrupt. In fact, I believe all politicians, for the most part, since the beginning of time, have been corrupt, including many of our own here in Washington, D.C. So I care about the people. And as Andrei said, this is an invasion of an innocent country, innocent people by a world superpower. And when a world superpower rolls in another country and starts firing ballistic sized missiles the size of telephone poles in the side of apartment buildings filled with women and children, leveling elderly communities, there is no place in our modern society, global society, for that to be allowed. And I knew, and many of my teammates I work with knew, that we had to go there and help in some sort of way. And one of the things I was super proud of was seeing NGOs, people from all over the world, flood there to help when the governments of the world did the wrong thing. They did not respond in the right way. They did not show their support for Ukraine at the beginning. It's almost disgusting to me. I'm happy to see a lot of people wanting to support Ukraine now, but it's almost disgusting to me now to see all the support when in February and March, these people were left alone. Thousands and thousands, as Andrei said, I would guesstimate over 500,000 people have lost their lives in this, and the world was silent. The governments of the world were silent. But when the governments of the world were silent, people were lined up on that border doing the right thing. When women and children were coming across that border without gas and fuel and taking a week to get across that border, dragging their suitcases in the snow and I seen it firsthand because I was there. I got there on March 1st. My first teammate was there 4 days before the invasion, but seeing women and children coming across with their pants frozen solid from their shoes and pants being wet, their lips were blue coming across that border. Their cell phones were dead because they didn't have batteries. They're coming across that border. What they met when they got to that border was people from around the world. Not one government agency was there. I was on these borders. Not one government agency, but people were there with piles of coats, with cell phones, with empty car seats to drive people. There was people from India with a hot bowl of cauliflower curry to get them their first warm meal. There was a guy that drove a piano from Germany, drug it behind his car, sitting on a border. It's snowing outside. It's like 10 degrees outside, and the guy's playing the piano. And I went to ask him, what are you doing here? And he's like, they've been hearing bombs and rockets, and I just want them to hear something beautiful. And he was playing Imagine All the People on his piano as people were coming across the border. It was just so beautiful to see everyone come together. And we went, I went across that border early on. I've been to Ukraine 10 times since February, usually about 10 days at a time. Most of the guys I go with are former special operations guys that are part of Mighty Oaks Foundation. We worked early on with the organization that I did the Afghan evacuations with, Save Our Allies, and now I'm working just with Mighty Oaks Foundation. But we worked on helping rescue people who were trapped there. I mean, Ukraine was a place that you didn't need mass evacuations because people could drive buses across, open the doors, and let people in. But there were also places where people couldn't get out, places that specific people were trapped. And so we helped rescue Benjamin Hall, the Fox News reporter. I recovered the body of Pierre, the longtime cameraman of Fox News, when he was killed. We've recovered several bodies of U.S. service members who were killed serving there and volunteering to help with the Ukrainian Legion. And so and then we helped groups like this group of disabled kids. There was a group of disabled kids that were in a bunker, 150 of them. Most of them were killed, and we were able to get the remaining 45 out. So we did a lot of those types of things. We helped build some communication infrastructure for NGOs to be able to communicate should Russia knock out a communications grid. And then we've moved to the front lines, where we go to places like Kharkiv and Mariupol and Odessa, Izum, and we went there to bring medical supplies and medical instruction to the troops on the front line, because a lot of that stuff's not getting there. I don't want to talk about that with the money in a second, but a lot of that stuff's not getting there. So we're building some of our special forces veterans in the Mighty Oaks. We build these medical kits that we know that they will use, and then we don't just bring them there and give them to them. We go there with a trauma doctor to teach them actually how to use it. Most of these guys are not professionally trained soldiers. They got limited training. So we're teaching them, okay, here's if instead of just getting a tourniquet, here's how you use a tourniquet. Here's how you treat a sucking chest wound if someone gets shot in the lung. Here's how you treat an overinflated lung, and all these things that they may not know how to do. So we teach them how to do those things. And then we use that relationship building by staying with them for a 10-day period and providing our Mighty Oaks mental and spiritual resiliency program and ministering to them on the battlefield and helping them with, because, as Mitzi really, it seems like you really get this, Mitzi, the Russians are doing, and we're seeing this in the very front lines, is they're using a psychological warfare at the most grotesque level. These Ukrainian troops will try to fight the Russians head to head, and they will retreat, regroup, and attack a civilian town instead of reattacking the troops. It sounds horrible, but from a military strategy of psychological warfare, it works, because these guys are like, I want to fight these Russian troops, but instead of fighting us, they're going to kill our women and children. And as a retaliation, it breaks the minds and will of the Ukrainian people. But there have been some of the most resilient people I've seen, and it's only lit a fire underneath them with a resiliency. But I have firsthand seen some of the things Mitzi is talking about. I went to Izum and seen in Izum where 4 apartment buildings, and I have photograph evidence of this, 4 apartment buildings that were only left to women and children were airstriked in the same exact precision spot of each of these buildings, right in the middle of these buildings, from the 5th floor to the 1st floor, blown to the ground. And there are no military targets in sight. Same thing in Kharkiv, where I've seen probably 100,000, enough place for 100,000 people live, just leveled. I forget the name of the town, but another town that I was in, seeing the elderly community leveled to the ground. The Russians are intentionally attacking. I went in a Zoom when the Ukrainians retook it after 6 months. We moved forward with the Ukrainian unit, and the Russian line closed behind us. I see I'm almost out of time, Frank.
Okay, I think we better bring this to a conclusion so we can get to Q&A, but go ahead, finish that thought.
I'll finish that thought. And they closed up behind us, and we identified mass graves of of up to 1,500 or 1,100 in one place and 400 in another, so 1,500 civilians. And so I'll close with this and saying, Andrei said a very important thing, that 111 billion dollars is claimed to have been sent there. None of it has government oversight. 50 billion is claimed to went to the military, 20 billion to the front lines. The truth is, we don't know where that money is going, and that money is not solving anything. It's only emboldening the problem, because it takes away any incentive to end this war when the politicians are making a lot of money off of this. And this war could be ended quickly if the United States of America will just take a strong position and get behind Ukraine in a more diplomatic way, as opposed to just pumping money into it for the military industrial complexes around the world. And so, I just ask everybody to be aware of what's going on and be praying for the Ukrainian people, and be, actively engaged as citizens, as a constituent to your congressional representatives, and be speaking up about how this money is being allocated and not helping the problem, making it worse. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an important point to which I know we'll return shortly in Q&A. Let me begin the questions with one to you, Andrei, if I may. You spoke of Putin's larger objectives, and I think Mitzi's account of the numerous invasions that have taken place at Russia's hands over the past couple of decades is instructive. Could you just elaborate a little bit further on those, both with respect to his ambitions with respect to Ukraine, or what's left of it after this murderous assault runs its course, but also beyond?
First of all, I would like to reiterate the position that Mitzi made, which is very, very important: the very aggressive nature of personality. Not so much Russia. We can talk about Russia as a nation, as a society, which also has some elements of aggressiveness. But even by Russian standards, what we have right now with the master in the Kremlin is enormous level of aggressiveness against other nations and against own people. So we have aggressions just during his term, in 1999 against Chechen people, in year 2008 against Georgia, in year 2014 against Ukraine, against Syria in 2015, and full-scale invasion in 2022 against Ukraine again. Though the war itself continues for 9+ years. So what is really important, that those invasions happened under each US president. That's very important. Especially from the point that Short has made in his last remarks about the active policy of the US administration and US president. Under each US president, Putin launched aggression. Under Clinton, against Chechnya, under Bush against Georgia, under Obama against Ukraine and Syria, under Biden against Ukraine again. There is only one exception in this line: 4 years of President Trump. Due to miraculous circumstances, during these 4 years, there was not a single new aggression that has been launched by Putin against anyone. Moreover, if we look into the numbers of Ukrainian military personnel on the front line in Donbass, that number fell during 4 years of Trump administration 16 times, from Obama to Trump. And that is a very important sign and indications of what might be very powerful instrument, how it is possible to stop this war and how it is possible to reduce the number of victims. Second, very important area that related to this: what is the long-term aim of Putin? Putin has in his mind the so-called historic Russia concept, according to which he wanted to restore or recreate, to be correctly, the so-called historic Russia that never existed, but existed only in his mind. And according to that view, the western borders of the so-called historic Russia is more or less coincide with the western borders of the Russian Empire at the end of 18th century. He has written extensively about that in yesterday at the State of Union, State of Russia address. He once again, not once again, twice, he mentioned again this concept of historic territories. And he once again denied the statehood to Ukraine. So it means that after 1 year of this terrible, horrible war, Putin still has the same purpose, just not only to subjugate Ukraine, but also subjugate Belarus, Moldova, Baltic republics, and some parts of Poland, according to his concept. He has written about that. He was talking about that not once. And also yesterday, he mentioned very often and very intensively his so-called discussion with NATO, with the United States, with the West. So he reiterated again his goal to return the so-called division line in Europe to the so-called 1997 line, which means it is an official document produced by Putin's Minister of Foreign Affairs. It means that just withdrawal of NATO members from the Central Europe to 1997 line, which means creation of conditions that would allow Putin to establish his control over Central Europe.
Thank you very much, Andrei. This is, again, an important piece of the context that is not, it seems to me, adequately understood, particularly by those who think if we simply effected some sort of ceasefire, end the war in place, take into account. Mitzi, you've talked quite powerfully about the spirit of the people of Ukraine with whom you've interacted, whether they're in the police or among the population. This is a point that I think also is hard for many of us to calibrate. When you hear or you talk to them about the idea of a peace being brokered or imposed, perhaps, by the West, if it simply tires of trying to make up for the asymmetry that Andrei spoke of in terms of the capabilities, the armaments, the financing between Russia and Ukraine. What kind of response have you gotten in that respect? Mitzi, are you there?
You're muted, Mitzi.
Unmute.
There, if you would mute.
Oh, okay. I'm itching to answer this question because I'm going to quote one conversation, but it reflects what I heard pretty much everywhere. I talked with a woman on the street. She spoke English, and she said, "I'm not afraid of rockets. I'm not afraid even of death. The one thing that really scares me is if somebody imposes a peace on us, which means that we're just going to be at war again a year or two later. No, we can't stop short of having a situation where we're not in perennial danger from Russia. We can't leave Russia with the ability, like keeping areas in Crimea or the Donbass, where they can just attack us again in the future. No, no, no. That's what scares me most. And I believe that reflects pretty much what I heard everywhere.
Thank you, Mitzi. Chad, again, you bring to this topic some very moving experiences on the humanitarian side, but let me just ask you, as a military man with some considerable experience in the service to our country, is that a prospect for this war at this point, as you see it, freeing Crimea, freeing Donbass, freeing the other areas that the Russians have occupied? And if so, what would it take to do that? I think I've heard you sort of suggesting that our emphasis should be less on military armaments for Ukraine and more on the humanitarian side. But give us a sense of your military evaluation of the situation on the ground.
Well, it's as Andrei says, this is very complex. How do you move forward without pushing us further into a war? That's the concern that seems like everyone, all ends of the political spectrum, are asking. I personally think that we openly should acknowledge that we are at war with Russia. This is a proxy war where it's no different. To Putin's eyes, it's no different. I mean, that's just why he's already talking about backing out of nuclear treaties with the United States, and because we are in fact engaged in a proxy war. And when you let something linger out like this, it's only going to fester and get worse. So some of these, I don't want to sound like conspiracy theorists, but some of these things that are happening in the United States, you have to ask yourself, is this attacks by Russia, by China? Some of these things that we're seeing, we are at war with Russia right now. So I think there's a better way to do it than the way we're doing it now. I also, my personal belief, if I had it from a military perspective, would be to make it a announcement, lead NATO into announcement that these are war crimes that are occurring. I know, and I know, I can't say how I know, but I know that chemical weapons have been used on civilians, and because I know it, I know that our White House knows it. They're clear war crimes that are and atrocities that are happening, enough to where the United States of America and NATO could say, this is no more, it's not going to be allowed anymore. We're reopening our embassy. We're moving a U.S. contingency of troops back into Ukraine. And I personally believe, and I would hope I would never be wrong in this, but I personally believe that when the U.S. and NATO move troops back into Ukraine to protect the Ukrainian civilians, I don't think that Russia would that Putin would take the chance of attacking U.S. troops. I think he would back off, and that I think he would have to. I think he'd pushed in a position to have to. As far as retaking Crimea and places like that, I think that's a stretch to be able to do that personally right now. But ground that's been gained since February 24th, I think that ground is not established. I think Russia would back off if the NATO and U.S. would show strength and support Ukraine, maybe not as a NATO ally, but as a place where war crimes are not allowed to occur, and that would be my positioning in that.
Wow, Andrei, you have the advantage of being the only one, certainly on the program today, but the only one I know who has worked closely with Vladimir Putin for a long time, although I think with a lack of enthusiasm, shall we say, ultimately leading, of course, to your departure from his government. What are your thoughts on that idea that as a matter of humanitarian intervention, the United States would lead and otherwise hopefully enjoy the support of other allied nations in trying to bring a measure of at least a cessation of the hostilities under their protection?
We know that any war is first of all psychological war. It's a war of wills of those people who are personalities, who gives orders to troops. And from this point of view, the recommendation that was given by Chad show that he's just a person who understands the personality and psychological character of Mr. Putin better than anyone that I met recently in the United States, because it is a very clear understanding that for such bullies to attack small and weak without punishment, it's one story. But to deal with a serious enemy or serious troops, those guys immediately retreat to the position that they could be dictated according to the international law. And this is, I understand, this is just really, we do understand that just to stop those horrible crimes, and that situation that Mitze described, this is a fear in which Ukrainians living right now, because everybody understands over all these years that if there will be any kind of ceasefire or some kind of scenario with not fulfillment of all deoccupation of the territory of Ukraine and clear guarantees for not repeating of these new aggressions, that will be repeated, no doubt, for anyone. And this will be not only repetition of this attack, it will be slaughter, monstrous slaughters of Ukrainian population, and especially those Ukrainians who would like to be Ukrainians, who have Ukrainians, who speak Ukrainian language, who have affinity to Ukrainian culture, the so-called intelligentsia, professors, teachers, doctors, officers of the army, officers in police, the people in the bureaucratic apparatus. This is a textbook of NKVD, KGB that they played more than a century in all occupied territories. That approach has been taken by Russian troops in year 2008 in Georgia, and in year 2000, from year 2014 in all occupied territories in Crimea and Donbass, and last year in occupied territories in other territories of Ukraine. So that those monstrous crimes will be repeated on all territory of Ukraine. There is no doubt about that. So the way how to deal with that is just to combine so-called hard power with the military support with soft power, which means very clear diplomatic language explaining to the aggressor what might happen if that bully would not come to beyond the international recognized borders. So that is why we need victory, but victory achieved in smart way.
Yeah, I say one thing
Yes,
to
go
that,
ahead, Chuck.
Andrei, it's you know, if we did take that lead and move people into, I think people really have to realize Ukraine is not in Russia. Russia's in Ukraine. So we demand a ceasefire, and what Putin is facing is a violation of Article 5 if he continues to this invasion while NATO is in Ukraine, he risks violating Article 5. And I think while he's crazy, he's not stupid. And, I think Article 5 is really deterrent for him. And so we play that in our favor. As Andrei said, this is could be handled very wisely and diplomatically and through the humanitarian role.
Chad, that question I want to come back to you on in just a moment. Mitzi, back to you. The humanitarian toll that's being taken, you've spoken to very powerfully, this idea of fields used to raise crops, which not only the people of Ukraine require, of course, but that we now know, and you most especially with your background in agriculture, the world needs. It would seem just another example of the crimes against humanity, but it suggests that the point that Andres just made about mass carnage being perfectly acceptable to Putin and to those under his command. That would seem to be your experience as well, and I guess therefore further add to the conclusion that there really isn't any alternative here but to effect a defeat of the Russians. Is that your sense?
Well, actually, I'm thinking of one guy I talked with who I was asking about, just generically, how do you deal with landmines? And he said, there's only one way, in my opinion, and it's an Abrams tank. I said, what do you mean? And he said, everything that we do that doesn't stop the war is just dragging on the ability of Russians to continue mining as fast and furiously as they can. So the longer the war drags on, the more, well, let's stick with agriculture for the moment. At this moment, there is an estimate from the equivalent of our Secretary of Agriculture in, I think it was November, that 10% of the productive agricultural land of Ukraine was just out of commission because of landmines. That was a few months ago, and there's still, there are these machines that can lay 7,500 landmines a day, and there's several of them. My view on the whole thing is that stopping the war is the top priority. And I don't mean stopping it in a way that the Russians can regroup and live to fight another day. No, the whole enterprise has to be shut down so that we can begin rebuilding Ukraine. But like the landmine clearing that's going on right now, talked with the guy yesterday at State Department. The US gets how critical dealing with landmines are or is. It's the State Department has $89 million spent or ready to spend on landmine clearing. So I asked this guy, his name's Michael Terry from State, and I asked him, you're going to be spending this money now, not after the war is over. And he said, yeah, because it's actually an extremely good investment to be clearing landmines now. But he also went along with the idea that what really matters is stop them from continuing laying more. I mean, turn the faucet of landmine laying off, and that means ending the war.
Yeah. Andrei, I want to come to you about how to essentially accomplish that. Let me just ask Chad one more question. Chad, you mentioned Bagram Air Force Base, a facility you know well, and obviously have an appreciation for both its strategic situation, its position, as well as how it can be used to good or ill, and in the moment under the control of the Taliban, it's the latter, obviously. One of the things that has come up in my mind as people have talked about, including the vice president at the Munich security conference known as Verkunda over the weekend, that the Chinese are in fact providing not just financing for the Russians' invasion of Ukraine through their purchases of energy and the like, but they're actually also probably arming the Russians as well. And it occurred to me that what if they were simply making deals with the Taliban to provide the Russians some of the $85 billion worth of small arms and ammunition and other kit that was surrendered there by the Biden administration. Is there any evidence from what you've seen on the ground that we're having our own weapons used against the Ukrainians in this moment?
A very good question, and it should be an extreme concern for every American. I mean, we left $85 billion estimated equipment there. They've tried to lower that number. I don't know what the number really is. Who cares? We left. If I left a pair of night vision goggles there, I would be probably in jail. But no one's accountable for this $85 billion. So you have that. You have Bagram Air Force Base, which the Taliban doesn't control, by the way. We know it's being run by China right now. So the most strategic place in the globe that we gave away, not to NATO, not to our allies, we gave away to the Taliban to get to the Chinese. That's who wanted it. That's who has it. And they have that equipment. The Taliban can't use most of that equipment because, the technicality of a lot of it. So it is very probable, because we do know the Chinese are, in this relationship with Russia. I mean, it is very probable that some of our equipment could be being sold to Russia. Russia has I haven't seen U.S. equipment. What I have seen is equipment as old as 70 years old, the gas masks that I've seen off of dead Russian soldiers. Because, when I went through a Zoom, I've seen probably, 60, 70 dead Russian soldiers and all their equipment abandoned. And I went through a lot of their equipment. Their equipment was like 70, 80 years old gloves from from World War II, and then gas masks are so they need equipment. They need good equipment. So if they can get U.S. equipment from China, I would not surprise me to see. But so while I can't not verify that, I can verify this. We left 75,000 of our allies behind in Afghanistan. Many of those commandos and many of those interpreters that we trained and worked with for 20 years, we left them behind while they were promised SIV, special immigrant visa status to the United States. And now they're on a kill list from the Taliban. So they need to escape. And you know where many of them are going? To Russia. Russia has promised them if they will go fight the Ukrainians for them, they will give them citizenship for their service to Russia to go fight Ukrainians. And while I support the Ukrainians and don't support greatly do not support the invasion I cannot blame these Afghans for wanting to get their family who's trapped in Afghanistan on a kill list, getting their family out to safety and having a chance to have citizenship somewhere where they're welcomed, even if it's Russia. And we're seeing our trained, the guys that we trained out there aligning with the Russians and fighting the Ukrainians. And that's a tragedy.
Indeed. Thank you, Chad. Andrei, final question to you. When you look at the scenario that you laid out a moment ago, I get that the psychological warfare dimension is key and hard necessarily to predict, let alone, apply. But one wild card that we hear a lot about, especially in this latest speech by Vladimir Putin, is the threat of nuclear weapons being used. He has them in abundance. There's reason to believe that he has not only modernized them extensively, but has a doctrine of their use, and perhaps in part based on his extensive service as a player, the player ultimately in successive exercises in which the simulated use of nuclear weapons, in some cases, by the way, with the Chinese, has been demonstrated. I just ask you for your thoughts on his calculation and what it takes at this point to deter that from being a factor in an end game on Ukraine.
I have probably 3 points to this very important question. The first one, we cannot be sure, and frankly speaking, nobody can be absolutely sure whether he will or he will not use these particular weapons. It's impossible to predict. But, and this is 2 other very important points. Over last year, he has so many times used this threat that he devalued this threat to the extent that we use this proverb that barking dog does not bite. He so many times promised or hinted or threatened to use nuclear that it looks like that for him is the instrument of trying to produce a fear, to frighten, especially those who is ready and willing to be frightened. And it was the initial periods of this last stage of the war on the part of the, for example, US administration. For example, Ukrainians are not afraid because they're fighting for their freedom, for their independence, for their survival. So that is why they are not afraid at all. But more important element, whether he really able and would be able to use it. And now we know that the very strong warnings to him not to do it came not only from the United States, but in these particular circumstances, I would say even more important, from China and India. Moreover, those warnings came publicly, not privately, back in last September in Samarkand, when both Chinese and Indian leaders openly said not to do it. They have repeated those warnings in November during G20 summit, and just recently, China made another so-called peace proposal. It's certainly a subject for discussion. What does it mean? But they made it very clear that nuclear weapons must not be used. And assuming the character relations between Putin and Xi, between current Russia and current China, I would say it's a very high probability that it is a very serious deterrent factor that would not allow Putin to use this instrument. Including
in the event that American forces are on the ground in Ukraine?
Especially in this case. In that case, actually, that's a guarantee that will not be used. That's actually, certainly, I cannot claim that I understand the logic of President Trump when he was saying that he could solve this problem within 24 hours putting Putin and Zelensky in one room and having negotiations. But I have some kind of the back feeling that probably is somebody in the US administration, like that person or another person, but person who has guts, who can talk to this bully in a pretty open and direct way, explaining to such a person the potential consequences of such an aggressive behavior. So there is a chance that this whole war, with total withdrawal of Russian troops from all occupied territories, really can be achieved within reasonably short period of time.
Wow. From your lips to God's ears. Mitzi, speaking God's ears, obviously we pray for your health and safety as you take on this new challenge of helping with the demining in Ukraine. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say a final word about your crowd-funded efforts to assist in this regard, the people of Ukraine, even as the Russians persist in mining their territory and killing and maiming countless numbers of them.
Okay, the crowdfunding, the address of it is Donor C, and that's one word, and it's donor like give and C like I'm looking at you. So Donor C/Ukraine. And one of the super virtues of it is, well, there are a couple. It's a new technology. The guy who heads it is very technologically savvy. I mean, he's plain is. And one of the things that if you donate, you get weekly contact with the project, so you can see exactly where your money is going. And I intend to, when I'm in Ukraine next, to be having weekly like podcasts or broadcasts explaining what I'm learning about mining and demining, and you'll have your own personal reporter. That would be me, and I would love to share this information with you. And then one other part, I get to tell the people in Ukraine about how much Americans are supporting them. So I would love to have, a $5 donation would be just so much better than nothing. So if you feel like, I don't know, the value of a Starbucks cup of coffee, donate $5 to Donor C/Ukraine, and you're going to make some people safer. You're going to make me happier. Thanks.
Well, we all want to do that for sure. Mitzi, thank you. And thanks to Andrei Illarionov and to Chad Robichaux, as well as Mitzi Perdue, for this really extraordinary insight into this war, worst on the European continent since World War II, where it stands now, why, and what might be done to bring it to a safe and enduring close. Thank you to our audience for joining us for this edition of our Center for Security Policy webinars. This one will be posted, as they all are, at securefreedom.org shortly. I commend to you not just, obviously, this video as something that you might share with others in your circles of influence, but also all of these products. We consider them to be one of the most important products of the center, especially at a moment such as this. Thank you again for joining us. Until next time, this is Frank Gaffney.